Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of Daffy's Roundtable. If you keep dart frogs, then my guest today needs no introduction. He has an incredible collection of frogs in some of the most beautiful tanks I've ever seen. We're joined today by Troy Goldberg, and we're going to discuss all things Oophaga from their natural history to their husbandry and captivity. We also discuss some of Troy's vivarium building methods, as well as touch on his 350-gallon Paludarium. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsor, Exoterra, who makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. As you guys may already know or can see just by looking behind me, I'm a big fan of all Exoterra's products, so I'm super excited to be working with them moving forward. Okay, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Troy Goldberg of Troy's Tropical Garage. Hello, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you? Thank you
Good.
so
How are
much for
you?
coming on. I'm doing great. I'm very excited for this. Another Dart Frog episode. Who can't be excited, right? Um, Awesome. I'm just gonna start things off. I know most people probably already know what you have in your collection, but if you can give us like a quick rundown of the species you're currently keeping, um,
Sure.
that would be awesome.
Okay. I'll start with I guess some of the more common frogs that I own. With Dendrobates tinctorius, we'll start with those. I have the Tinctorius azureus. I have Tinctorius citronella, Brazilian yellowheads, Oyapock, Qatari River, Green Sapolowini, Yellowbacks, and Vanessa. I think that's it. I'm
Awesome.
growing up some giant orange as well. And then I do have the Dendrobates leucomelis, the fine spot variant. And then I do keep the Phyllobates terribilis mint. Um, those are kind of more of the, I guess, more common frogs in my collection. Then I do have a couple species of Ranitomea. I keep the Ranitomea uh, reticulata, and I have the solid form of those. And then I have Ranitomea highland syrensis. Those are the only two Ranitomeas I keep. And then I do keep quite a few Oophaga species. Starting with Pamilio, I have two different forms of Bastimentos. I have the Escudo and Rio Colubre, Solarte, and I think that's it for Pamilio. Um, and then I keep the large obligates as well, which the Oophaga histrionica, Lamani, and Sylvatica. And I have one species of Lamani. It is one locale, I should say, the yellow form. I do keep one Sylvatica, which is the San Lorenzo. And then histrionica, I have Blue Histo, I have Anchikaya, the Tato, and I have small form redhead, large form redhead, and bullseye, and I also have Bahia Solano, and I think that's it.
Awesome.
Um, and that's the dart frog collection, so to speak. And I also have the 300-gallon paludarium that houses Adelopus balios and also some Hylonobatrachium valorai, the glass frogs. So I have a group of balios and a group of glass frogs. I think that's it. Um,
That is awesome.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that should be
Yeah,
it.
it must be a tough question to answer. I'm sorry.
It's
That's awesome.
okay.
I'm glad you have so many Ufago because I have 100 Ufago questions to ask you. Um,
Awesome.
but before we get into that, the Highland Syrensis, the Ranitomea Highland Syrensis, is that the same um, locale as the Rio Pachieta? I think it's pronounced.
That is not a question for me.
Okay,
Because
okay.
honestly, I'm not well versed in Ranitomea. I've only kept a few species in 20. This is my 23rd year of keeping dart frogs, and
Wow.
I've only kept maybe four or five species of them, and so many of their same thing with Pamilio too. Like, it's called one thing for a few years, and then it gets the taxonomy gets switched, and something it starts getting called something like that. Just recently happened last week with some of the Fantasticus. um I saw they're now being called Summerside or Summersea, whatever you want to call them. So
Right.
stuff's always getting changed. So I'm not exactly sure on that. I know there are multiple different locales of the Sorensis, the Highland Sorensis, but yeah, like some are Tango Maria, and um, there's quite a few. So I'm not exactly sure if it's the exact same, but yeah, I'm sure it's similar.
That was just them calling. I know the stress is called. I asked that question because I've heard that there's a difference between breeding speeds because I've seen the Rio Pachieta or whatever, however it's pronounced, and
Yeah. Hmm.
they breed like rabbits. And then I've also heard people saying that they have another form of Syrensis that's breed really slow. I only keep the Ranitomi Vanzolini, so I don't know. I was just curious if it was the same species. If it is, good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah, I mean mine produce pretty well. I don't pull too many of their eggs, just because I got a lot on my hands with the Tinctorius,
Sure.
the Phyllobates, and the Oophaga. So if I find a baby in their tank, I kind of let them raise their own like Pomelio do. So I'm not like pulling many and raising them myself. I think I raised up maybe 10 last year,
Okay.
and the rest I just let them do their own thing in the tank. So
Awesome.
and yeah, as far as like some species breeding faster than others or being more viable than others, I guess. Proactive, the I think sometimes certain locales it may be slightly skewed one way toward the other, but
Right.
I think a lot of it comes down to just particular animals. There may be one locale that's everyone says has a hard time, but then somebody gets a hold of a really really active female and they produce like rabbits.
Yeah.
So I think some of that just has to do with it can be genetics and stuff like that too. So um, yeah, I usually don't look at something like there's just that species is so hard to breed. I kind of think it's every individual animal is different.
Right. And on the topic of locales, we were just talking before the episode, so I'm going to ask you this again.
Yeah,
You were saying something about how sometimes the locales aren't the actual locales of where the frogs come from. Do you
yeah,
want to maybe touch on that a little
sure.
bit?
Like there's some that are Bastimentos, for example. If you go to Bastimentos Island, um, you're going to find Bastimentos there. If you go to Isla Colon or Colon, however you want to say it, you're going to find the maybe Timby. You're going to find the Drago Colons there. Solarte, you're going to find Solarte there. But there's some locales that don't necessarily have the island name attached to them, and this is just I'm speaking in familiar terms. Um, something that we may call, I don't know, a Rambala. I'm not sure. I'm just using an example. I'm not sure if this is actually one, but it may not be the actual locale or where that frog's from. One to protect, the actual population there, so poachers aren't coming and smuggling those frogs constantly. Also, a lot of the people that collect those frogs, and what I'm going to say here is a lot of it's directed more towards Tinctorius. There's not a whole lot of information on Tinctorius locales, and one of the reasons is the collectors that are collecting these frogs from the wild and making money off them. They don't want to give the exact location of where these frogs are from. Again, from poachers, that's their livelihood. Other people can come take the frogs and take basically money from them. So it's there's quite a few things there, but they may be in the general area. I'm sure there's frogs from French Guyana that may not actually be from French Guyana. Maybe they're from Guyana, and same thing. There's probably frogs from Brazil that actually um, came in and got exported through Guyana or
Right.
Suriname. They're right on the border there. So, it's and obviously we know things from Brazil are illegal technically because of the Lacey
Yes.
Act. So, um, you know, but you just never know the way things were done. I think we've got a good grip on stuff now, but I think back in the 90s, 80s, early 2000s, stuff from Brazil could have been being exported out of Guyanas or Suriname, stuff like that. So, um, yeah, it's just because I guess getting back to your original question, just because it does have a certain locale attached to it doesn't always mean that that's exactly you go to that area in the jungle doesn't mean that's where you're going to find the frogs. Um, so yeah, it's just an interesting little tidbit there.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry for making you repeat that. I just found it so interesting. That's
Yeah.
I never would. I mean, like obviously, when you get a frog, like I have the Oyapak as well, and the first thing I did was, okay, let me look up the Oyapak River and the Oyapak area,
Yep.
and like trying to figure it. Now it's the thing is I could have been looking up a completely different area, so it's very interesting to that you say that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, there's also different like spellings. Like I think there's a few different spellings of Oyapak, and
I
um,
noticed that as well.
there's yeah, it's like so which area is that from? Did they
Right,
choose that locale because that could confuse people? Because there's
correct.
multiple different spellings. It's like I'm not gonna go all over the place looking for these things. So it's just things you wonder about. Um, and really the only way to find out is to talk to people that are down there or live down there and actually see where these populations are in the wild. If they can confirm it or not. But again, communication with them, with the people that are down there, isn't always the easiest, and they're also oftentimes not the most willing to just openly give information to you. So that's presents a challenge there in itself.
That's yeah, very very interesting. Um, and then on the topic of locations and areas, Oophaga. I know from watching Mike, Diana, and Adam's videos, and like those trip videos that the Oophaga Pumilio appears to be
Yep.
very common in like Costa Rica. But where are
Yeah.
some of the other ones coming from?
So
You know,
you know, it's the Pamilia are generally all Central America, um, Panama, Costa Rica. I don't think there's any down in like Ecuador or anything like that. That's where all the large obligates are from. The I guess the bulk of the large obligates are coming from Colombia, and then you have companies like Tesoros de Colombia who are sustainably now bringing in frogs that are captive bred down there, and then they ship them here, which is awesome because a lot of those frogs were highly smuggled in the 80s and 90s and completely depleted populations. They're still smuggled today. I think they are the um, a lot of. I guess I don't want to get into a huge debate or anything, but a lot of people in the frog hobby seem to really like put their foot down on a certain tinctorius from Brazil or a certain, galactinatus from Brazil. Um, but they're already here in the hobby and everything, and they go crazy about those, but they're not going crazy about the large obligates. You don't see them being talked about as much, nearly as much. I mean, I'm sure Fish and Wildlife and everything looks at those too, but they're the ones, in my opinion, that are affected the most. Um, I guess we can get into that in a few minutes, but
yeah,
um, because the Tinctorius and the Galactinatus, those frogs are, on they're not endangered. They're least
least
threatened
concern. Yeah,
species. Yeah, least concern. Where some of those large obligates, the Atelopus species, a lot of the Amarega species, I mean, they're critically endangered. So, and they don't produce, you know, those frogs don't produce nearly as many frogs as the Tinctorius and Galactinatus, especially in captivity. If you're talking
right.
about like things being smuggled for the hobby, um, you know, you need to supply America with a Tinctorius. You could have five pairs of adult frogs, and they could supply the hobby.
In
Where
like
with
in less than a
Histrionica,
year.
Pamilio, yeah, exactly. You need
Yeah,
for like Histrionica and Pamilio and those frogs to, you know, I guess keep up with the demand. I mean, you need hundreds and hundreds of pairs because let's be honest. I mean, if I have a Histrionica pair of mine, if they produce 10 healthy offspring in a year, I'm stoked. Like that's a good year.
right.
Is 10 babies. Where Tinctorius, I could pretty much raise up 100 froglets in my sleep. I mean, it's not they just like if you have the conditions right and you have their tanks set up right and you stay on top of pooling eggs and raising tadpoles, they're gonna continue to breed. Where the Oophaga, it's some people have like really good pairs where they're getting Pamilio, they're getting 6 or 8 froglets every 3 to 4 months. Like that's awesome. but that is on the rare side. I would say the average is probably 3 to 4
Okay.
froglets every 3 to 4 months, and not all those are always healthy. So sometimes you get one that has SLS or has some sort of metabolic bone disease. They're a pain in the neck. Um, but that's, I guess I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
No, no,
um,
so, yeah,
yeah. And your original question with where some of the frogs are from or why they're hard to attain is, and still even with tesoros, they're down there in Colombia, and it's hard for them to get permits for frogs. And also, some of the land that these frogs are from um, are extremely dangerous with cartel, because they're literally on the lands where these cartel are doing their operations, and it's like
right.
there's all kinds of you know extreme danger when getting some of these locales in Colombia. Ecuador has some large obligates, mainly Sylvatica, the Histrionica and Lamani. Those are all from from Colombia mainly.
I was gonna
But
ask. So when you say, sorry to cut you off. So when you say large obligates, it's those species of the Namani, the Histronica,
and
um,
Sylvatica,
and Sylvatica. Okay, interesting.
yeah. Now there, yeah, it's Sylvat because there are some Sylvatica that are as big as Histrionica and Lamani. Um, there also are some Sylvatica in Colombia too, but yeah, I'm trying to think another large obligate. There's a couple other obligate species, but they're mainly small. There's kind of like an in between that granulifera. It's kind of a they're not as small as Pamilio, and they're not as big as Sylvatica. They're kind of in between there. Um, so it's just like a medium, a medium
Right.
Oophaga. But yeah, they're mainly all south of Pamilio in Central America. But yeah, it's really cool, and they are, like you were saying, they're very abundant. Like if you go to Bastimentos, you're gonna come across lots of Bastimentos Pamilia. Um, I mean,
Yeah, I would
they're
love to
everywhere
go
down
down there. Yeah,
there. Me too.
just to
Yeah,
see one in the wild. Yeah,
it's a beautiful vacation spot too.
100%. Yeah, yeah, I bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And then and then to touch on what you were saying earlier. So, some of the large obligates are even harder to attain. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah. I mean,
is
it's
that
just
because they're sorry to again to but
no. Go
is that
ahead.
because their populations are also less in the wild than, like, let's say the poachers, is again going back to the restrictions in the areas.
Yeah, I mean, there's some like I mean, Lamani, for example, is like the red Lamani. There's locales that used to. I mean, I don't know personally, but I mean, I've talked to people and heard stories of people that when you were down there in the 80s and 90s, just on a trail or even driving in a
Right.
car, they're everywhere on the side of the roads. They're everywhere.
Wow.
Those
Okay.
localities have none. There's
Okay.
nothing there anymore. Um, there is a few locales of the red Lamani still, yellow Lamani. The Lamani got hit really bad. I mean, they used to get exported by the hundreds in the 80s and 90s, and they were just in a wooden box and shipped wherever. And I mean, half to three-quarter of them died. And then the other thing was nobody knew how to keep them alive. So it was just something like there's thousands of these frogs everywhere. We can collect them. It won't hurt the population. That we don't know anything about their breeding, anything like that. Let's bring them to the hobby. And we were just killing. It's like, yeah, no big deal. We're killing them. There's
Yeah.
tons of them. So
Yeah.
those populations, which is really sad. Um, but there are populations where um, you can still find quite a bit of the Histrionica and Sylvatica and Lamani out there. Um, it's not like they're all super low in numbers, but there's certain that are just basically extinct, which is sad.
Yeah. No, very. Um, and then so like you said, that they didn't know how to care for them. Is that because they're very different than keeping? I've never kept them personally. Are they very different than keeping Tinctorius and Phyllobates and Ranatomea? Is there something different in their care? Is it just the breeding that's a lot
Yeah,
tougher?
it's so I don't want to make it seem like it's completely different. Um, I mean, all my tanks are basically set up the same.
Right.
Um, plant choice is one thing that you have to look at with dealing with large obligates. Vitamins and supplements seem to be a little bit more important than with your tinctorius. and phyllobates. Um, and they just seem, I don't know if it's their skin or something, but their skin seems more sensitive
Okay.
than the other frogs. So there's things you have to look out for. Not that you don't have to look out for in tinctorius. I mean, you have to look out for bacterial and fungal infections in tinctorius and anything. But they seem, very, I guess, prone to having some issues with their skin, and they can get same thing with terribilis. Though they get the foot rot if it's too wet in
Yes.
the tank. That they're very prone to getting foot rot. So similar thing with histrionica, they can get foot rot really easily, and it seems to be a big issue with frogs that were raised by tesauros, and those frogs that came here, people were keeping too wet. I think there was a big jump in the wetness of the tank that Tesauros was keeping the frogs, and then people were getting them here and keeping them really wet, and they were all like having really bad bacterial infections, fungal infections, and a lot of those frogs were lost in the recent imports. But they've kind of figured it out that they got to be kept a little drier, at least for the first few months, slowly transition them into like
The
the
higher
way, I
humidity
mean,
and like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Which, I'm a big proponent of keeping, my vivariums have good ventilation.
Right.
I think it's really important. The kind of archaic way of keeping a full solid glass top with no ventilations. I think that's kind of people are realizing is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
So I get this question a lot. People ask me, how often should I miss my tank? And I tell
I was about
everybody,
to ask.
yeah. I tell everyone the same thing. It's different for everybody. It depends on what kind of tanks you have set up, how much ventilation you have set up, your ambient humidity in your room, the ambient temperature in your room. There's all kinds of factors that come into play here. The best way I describe to people, um, where your tank is in a good humidity range, um, I have my misting system go off 8 times a day, 8 times every 24 hours. So
Okay.
it's every 3 hours. It's going off for 20 to 30 seconds. Now my
Okay.
garage is extremely dry. My tanks all have really good ventilation, and I have a fan running in the room. So
Right. You
after
need it that
misting,
often.
yes,
Yeah.
and a good way to like kind of measure your humidity is that if you think about in the jungle and it rains, everything's going to be drenched, soaked. But then
Yeah.
in about 2 hours after it's done raining, the leaves are crunchy when you're walking on the leaves, and it kind of dries out. It's still humid. You could still have some like I have all my tanks right now because I have a lot of vents kind of closed off. Just one of the vents, I keep the door vent right now closed off because my heater in here it really dries it out.
So it
Um,
kind of reduces the amount of humidity leaving the tank.
Yes.
Okay.
So because I want to keep some of the humidity in there. If I had them both open, like right now, the humidity in my garage is at 19%. So it's pretty dry.
Wow. Okay.
It gets
Yeah.
down sometimes to like 7-8%. The Resner heater I use it gets extremely dry. So I cover up the door vent right now. So there's still ventilation up the top, but there's not as much fresh air coming in the door because I need to retain some of that humidity. But so I missed my tanks a lot. The tank is wet, and then about 2 to 3 hours later, it dries out, or even an hour later, it can dry out. And um, my tanks right now, the front of the glass, all has condensation on them. None of them are dry. There's a little condensation on all the front glass right now, but inside the tank, the leaves are dry. That is a good kind of indicator that the tank is humid. Obviously, the glass is you know getting condensation on it. That means there's good humidity in there, and the ground is dry. If there's tons of moisture on your glass and the leaves are soaking wet, that's when you can have some issues come up.
Yeah.
And I don't mean soaking wet at certain times during the day. I mean always.
All the
If
time.
the leaves are always wet, you're misting too much. And it's a balance. You got to kind of figure out with, like I said, with your room, and you take into everything into account. You'll find what's going to work for you.
And how
Um,
good your drainage
so
layer is as well, or how your
exactly.
draining method. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the draining's huge. And it's something that since I drill my tanks, I mean, I would never go back to not drilling the tanks. I drill all my
Which is great
tanks,
too.
and it's something I never even have to worry about. Like I don't ever think about, unless sometimes like currently in Ohio, it's, I don't know, freezing, and my drain line I have all my tanks. They run to a drain line, and then the drain line runs outside to a rock or a bed of rocks next to my driveway. So it's frozen right now.
That's
So
frozen. Yeah.
um, yeah, so it's kind of backed up, and I have had to manually do what I used to do and stick a tube underneath and siphon it out in a
Yeah.
couple tanks recently, just a few tanks, but hopefully we'll get some decent weather where that it'll start draining out again.
Yeah. See, that's
But
impossible for me because it's gonna be freezing up here for the next like 3 months anyway. So I need to find another method for sure.
yeah,
That's very interesting though. That yeah, it's something that I also get asked and ask very frequently because it's an interesting topic. You know, everyone keeps their frogs.
yep.
Like it's a big debate that goes on even you on the Facebook groups. Keep them
Oh,
drier,
absolutely.
or I'm keeping my frogs too humid or anything.
Yep,
But um, that's awesome. Okay, so back to the Oophaga. As I
yep,
said, I have like
yep.
a million questions on them.
Sure.
Um, when it comes to the breeding, they are obligate egg eaters, correct?
Yep,
Um,
yep.
I've heard, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard that there's now some form of like how they make the Rapashi gel, something that you can do or feed that kind of replaces the eggs. Have you heard of this? And
Oh,
do you know if it works
n-
or from that
no,
saying
I've
you
not
haven't heard?
heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I know that you can keep the tadpoles will eat other things. They'll eat
Okay.
algae, they'll eat diatom, they'll eat fruit flies, little bugs that fall in the water. They will eat that, um, but they don't develop off of that.
Properly.
So you can keep a tadpole alive for 5 months and then start feeding it, its trophic eggs from as long as it's the same species. I think it's okay. You still may have some issues, but they will they'll start developing, and that's normally it takes a Pamilio. I think it's 60 eggs, maybe 75 eggs,
Wow.
um, 60 eggs to complete the metamorphose. So
Wow.
that normally takes about 2 to 3 months, and
That's a big strain
that's
on the
why
females.
big strain. It's
Big strain on
huge, and,
females.
and
Yeah.
that's why like when some people tell me they're like I've my pair got 8 offspring this time. I'm like, holy, like
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
480 eggs.
Yeah.
That's a ton for just a 2.5 month span. Like that's wild.
For
I
a
someone said
tiny,
they had
tiny
two.
frog.
Yeah, and the history or the Lamani supposedly are 120 eggs. It's double. Um, that's what I've been told. I've not actually seen it myself, but I've had friends tell me that the Lamani it's like double the amount of eggs that Pamilio and Histrionica take. So sometimes they can take longer, and it's more strain on them. So um, yeah, I mean I've bred both, but I don't get to count all the eggs that go in the Bromeliad. I
For
just
sure.
sometimes I
Yeah.
can I can shine a light and see there's and I will say I am impressed sometimes at the amount of eggs that are dropped in that little bromeliad axle at one time.
So it's not just one at
There's
a time.
no. There's times
Okay.
I've seen like 8 to 10 eggs in that just one drop.
Yeah.
Where if I went the day before and looked in the bromeliad axle, I saw no eggs. Went the next day and there's 10 eggs. There's like a clutch of 10 eggs
Wow.
sitting there for them to
And
eat.
then
So
how long does it take them to eat? Do you know, like roughly?
I haven't really I didn't document that or anything, so I don't
Okay.
have like accurate data. Um, but I know because I've raised some myself too with eggs, like not infertile eggs, eggs that were fertilized by the male, but I just still threw them in and they eat them.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and I used to throw in like 4 to 5 eggs at a time. They'd be gone in a day or even sometimes a few hours. So they do gobble them down. But I raised Lamani, of course. I didn't choose Histrionica to raise by myself. Um, and yeah, it's not something that I could recommend to anybody. It's a lot of work, because you also kind of have to just so that it doesn't make a big mess in the water and foul the water. I was basically taking the yolk out of the like,
The
so it was
like
like, yeah,
dejellying the egg, sort of.
basically yes.
Wow.
And I would do like pull a clutch of 10 eggs, do that, and I'd give each tadpole 2 to 3 eggs. If I found 2 clutches, I'd give them like double the eggs. But yeah, and it's important, I will say too, when you're raising them yourself, the tadpoles, if they're like, because they're young, usually when people do them themselves, they see because there's sometimes your histrionica and familio, they'll lay clutches like crazy. There's like 10 clutches in the tank, and they only transport 5 tadpoles. So you may have 8 tadpoles sitting in a canister, and you're just like, what, am I just going to let these things dry out and die?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people do. Or some people try to raise them themselves, and that's what I did. So you're raising these tadpoles from the time they're a day old, and they will not. I noticed they would not eat any eggs. Like I couldn't give them Aratus eggs or Tinctorius eggs or Familio eggs. Like they wouldn't eat anything besides the parents' eggs or same species. Like histrionica tadpoles could eat histrionica eggs.
That's crazy.
I did have them eat Familio eggs, but the ones that ate Familio eggs, they all had some sort of deformity or deficiency, or they were small. They weren't correct. So I'd say it's very important for the first 4 to 6 weeks, if you're going to raise them yourself, to use species same eggs, and then after that they get some size to them. You can feed them Tinctorius, and I know like a lot of, I think Tesauros, and I know some other people, Europeans, they'll use the Phalobates vittatus eggs because they're like tons of eggs and
I have over 100 frogs. I can confirm I would definitely use them as feeders, like
and
100%.
that's what a lot of those people, they have the vittatus for the feeder eggs.
Yeah.
And they've done it successfully, but again, it's a ton of work. And if you're someone like Tesauros, you're a sustainable farm, like that's what you do,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a way of business. And people that are doing this for a living, um, I'd say, yeah, it may be worth it to you if you've got help, that you have someone helping in your frog room and they want to go through and do that, like sure, go for it. But
Yeah.
for me, I don't do this. I'm not a company. Um, this isn't my job. It's a hobby. And I mean, I do make money off it as well, but it's not my main source of income. So to me, I just let the frogs do their thing. That's why one of the things I love about the Oophaga is just you let them do their thing. And it's so interesting watching the whole breeding behavior. Um, and it's always super exciting when you see, even if I've seen a redhead histrionica come out 45 times, the next one is just as exciting. So I'm like, oh, what kind of patterns this one have? It's always
Yeah.
fun to see the patterns, and
100%.
yeah, it's really cool.
That's yeah. I can agree with that. It's super interesting. Again, I haven't kept them yet. I would love to one day, but I would love to see the whole process of the care. So you
Yeah.
mentioned they lay about like they'll lay multiple tadpoles at once and only move five five
Yeah.
tadpoles. They will always five. Is that just like
No, I was just throwing out a
oh, just that
number. Sometimes,
no, okay,
yeah,
okay,
I've had them lay, you know, sorry, the light maybe just changed in here. My neon light just went on. They and my misting system is going off now. Um, so I've had them where they've laid, 6 to 10 eggs in they're developing in 4 different canisters. So I'm like, man, I'm gonna have a bunch this time, and then I have one frog come out. You know
because they just decided
that does,
to
that
put
they probably transported, and I would guess if you only have one come out, they may have transported three, 3 to 6, and then oftentimes they just decide. I don't know if they can sense something or they can tell that something's wrong with the tadpole, and they just stop feeding it. Sometimes the tadpoles just die in the water. If the water's real foul, if it doesn't get,
right.
it's because it's important to flush bromeliads. And if you're not staying on top of flushing them manually, which oftentimes I don't, luckily I missed enough where the
Yeah,
misting system can kind of take care of that. But if they, for whatever reason, sometimes you're just like, you guys are a bunch of knuckleheads. Like, why are you laying these tadpoles in the worst spots?
yeah,
You're just like, it's a dry spot, doesn't get hit by the misting system. It's in a half decayed, dying leaf. I listened to a podcast recently where there was a guy who studies them in the lab. He studies Pamilio, and he was saying a similar thing. And their thinking is that a lot of times Oophaga may lay tadpoles in a half dead leaf or a leaf that's about to die, because that is a place where it's less likely to have predators and outside things come and check that out, which was really interesting to me. I'm like,
That's
oh, that
very
I
interesting.
guess that makes
Yeah.
sense. A big, fresh, healthy, water nursery that's easy to view and you can see into it. It's probably a likely spot where something would come and check out and see if there's anything in there they want to eat.
There's about,
So that
yeah.
was kind of interesting, very interesting to me. It was a really cool guest on Amphibicast. I really enjoyed that episode.
Is
But
this the last one
um,
with the carotenoid paper, or
yes, yeah,
one of the few last
yeah,
ones at this point? Yeah. Okay.
yes, it was.
Yes,
Yeah, it
that
was like
was a
2 weeks
very
ago. Yes,
interesting episode. Yes.
yeah,
Yes,
I
I agree with you.
really enjoyed
I
that.
I, I didn't
Um,
catch that I don't remember hearing that, but that I'm probably gonna have to hear it a few more times because that was definitely a very
yeah,
interesting episode.
because
Um,
it's something I've looked at. I'm like, why are you guys? And like my Lamani do it constantly.
yeah,
They're my Lamani are my favorite frogs. Um, I absolutely love them, and they just every time I find a tadpole, I'm like, there's been 4 different
please.
times that I've had to raise them up myself from. Luckily, they were like about 2/3 grown. The tadpoles were, but I see a leaf that starts just hanging down. It's not holding water anymore, and I'm about to pull it, and I see wiggling. I'm like, oh my god! They do it constantly. They lay in these leaves that and end up not holding water, and if I didn't pull it, the tadpole would definitely. I've
What's
never
that?
heard of.
Okay.
I have never heard of Oophaga moving a tadpole to a spot and then it stops holding water and then they move it again. They've never. I
They
just
just
they just
they
got
give up on
they
it.
let them go.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
So like I've had to do that oftentimes with my Lamani where I've never had to do it with any of my other frogs. So my Lamani are always doing that, laying them in the I say like the bonehead, just biggest bonehead places.
Yeah,
Always like really dried leaves at the bottom of Bromeliad that are like literally about to fall off. And I'm just like, I have to check every day and make sure it's still holding water. Um, but yeah, they constantly do that. It's really annoying.
that's very interesting. I wonder if they have like a different logic to it, or if there's a different reason to it. Like you said, maybe those are the weaker tadpoles, or um, the decaying leaf. Maybe that's what's attracting flies that are then dying in the water that the
Yeah,
tadpoles are eating. I don't know,
it
but
it could be.
it's a very interesting thought. Now, when you're flushing the bromeliads, this is something I've always wondered. How do you not flush out the tadpole?
So you don't want to flush it with a very strong stream of something.
Okay.
Um, oftentimes, a pump sprayer, like a pump mister, and if you spray in the very center of the bromeliad, the centermost axle, and that way you could even spray in there with a pretty good pressure. But the water that you know, it flushes in a way where it's not like like you know
Throw it just
super high.
coming
Yeah,
up.
it's not a
Yeah.
super high flow. Here, hold on one second.
Describe. I see it. I have the exact.
Well, I use this.
Oh, okay.
This
I
is
was looking at
something
the one
I
on the back.
use.
Okay.
So I just get spring water, and then I have a bulkhead into the lid, so like I can unscrew the lid here, and then basically what I do is I just have Miss King line attached to it, and so when I want to flush, because I like to flush manually with spring water. There's a whole debate about spring water and RO water.
And
So
yeah,
RO water doesn't have the nutrients, and the tadpoles need the nutrients. There's all kinds of um, studies, and there's all kinds of drama. I like to kind of stay out of the drama, so I just use both. So I use RO water in my misting system, and then I manually flush with the spring water. But all I do is I basically just turn this upside down, and then I put this wherever I want to. So if there's a
Jesus.
tadpole I know is in a certain spot, I can flush it out that way. Um, and sometimes I do wait from the time I know that frogs transported tadpoles. I like to wait a good month because when a tadpole's super young, you could easily flush it out.
Okay.
And if I don't know the exact date, but I know they're taking care of tadpoles, and I want to flush the bromeliad, I'll put a 16-ounce cup sort of like wedged underneath where I'll check and see where the
Wait.
water would flow out. So I kind of put a 16-ounce cup there, and I have caught a few tadpoles
You
doing
have.
that.
Okay.
So they were generally smaller though, not bigger. But again, it's something important with the flow, the amount of flow that's coming out and doing that flushing. If you took like a garden hose and just like, sprayed it in there, yeah, they'll probably go flying in. That being said, I'm sure some could actually stay in because they wedge themselves tight in the corners. There's times, you know, actually, a lot of people don't know this, but a way to tell if there's a tadpole in an axle is a good way to check. You check at night when the lights are off and you shine a flashlight, and you can kind of see in the axle better. You'll see little tiny micro bubbles in that bromeliad, like right along the backside where the water is meeting the next leaf up. You'll see a bunch of little micro bubbles there because that's the actual tadpole swims up and they're breathing air. So they create little bubbles, and the water's usually slightly cloudy. Um, it's not like crystal clear, and that's usually all the eggs and all that stuff in there. So all that cloudiness and nastiness that's in there, that's why I think it's important to kind of flush that stuff out.
It's like doing water
And even
changes when you're
sometimes,
growing them yourself.
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah, it's because yeah, I was staying on top of that like crazy when I had them in little cups. But yeah, I do. Now that I think about it, oftentimes when I'm flushing, I do put a 16-ounce cup under the bromeliad, also to catch. A lot of times there's still trophic eggs in there, and when I'm looking in the water, that all the water that drained out, there's still eggs. So I'll pull the eggs out with a spoon and just throw them back in the axle where I know there's a tadpole.
But
So
like fertile
um,
eggs, like
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah.
it's eggs that they fed. It was the trophic eggs
Okay,
that
yes.
I flushed out some of those trophic eggs. So I'm like, yeah, let me give them back.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like, yeah, I
Keep
mean,
feeding
it's
them.
food. So yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's a super interesting process watching the whole thing. And I mean, I've been keeping Pamilio for I think 10 years, 9 or 10 years, and I've been
Oh,
keeping Histrionica for 8. Um, and they are all very cool species. The Histrionica I do tend to like more. Um, Mainly it's their behavior and their boldness. I mean, not all Pamilia are shy, but like Bastimentos are incredibly bold for me. They're always out. They do not care if I slide the door open. They don't care if I put a camera in their face. They
that's
don't
the
care.
best. Yeah.
I see them all the time. But like my Solarte are a little on the shy side. Um, my Escudo are they're bold, but they're just so small. Sometimes they're hard to find. And then
Yeah.
you have a well planted tank. It's like it's really hard to find them. My Histrionica, it's very rare where I'm like, where are they? They're just always out. And Pamilio will walk. They like kind of strut when they're breeding.
Yeah.
Histrionica do, yeah. It's really cool. Like a female will be around, male's sitting here calling, and then the female moves, and you'll see. So if she moves this way, he'll go like, he like moves like
Follow circle.
robotically, and then
Yeah.
he'll start strutting and like kind of walking after her, which is cool. But Histrionic could kind of do that all the time. Like if they're feeding, if you put flies in, they walk to the food. Now if they're spooked, they'll hop. But oftentimes the Histrionica, Sylvatica, they walk everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's silly to say. I've said this before. Um, it makes them seem like they're more intelligent, if that makes any sense. But everything they do, it looks like there's a purpose. Where when you watch Tinctorius, it's like they're just like food,
What are you
and
doing?
they're just,
Yeah. 100%.
they're just like they're clumsy kind of.
Yeah.
The Histrionica are, I don't know, they're just really bold. They're awesome to watch breed. They're so variable in pattern, and there's tons of different colors. They're just so unique. Like the Tado are just such a unique looking frog. Um,
Yeah.
just absolutely awesome. So
They're
that's the large obligates have become my favorite over time, but I still love all. I mean, I love Pamelia, I love Tinctorius, Phalobates, love them all.
sure.
So
Yeah. No. Yeah. The For sure. No, I can imagine that. I got multiple species now, but I still like I barely ever see my Vitalis, but when I see them, I'm like, yes, that they were
yeah,
the first species I ever got. Maybe a bit of a mistake,
yep.
but they were. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Okay, then before we jump off the Oophaga topic, I've heard a lot about. You mentioned it as well that they need more um, minerals and vitamins and all of that stuff, and I've heard a lot about the calcium clay.
Yeah.
Do you use it?
So
Yeah.
yes, yep. Yeah, I use calcium clay. I don't use it like some people use it as an entire substrate. I kind of make little
Okay.
cups. Like
Yes.
for some of the enclosures, I use like the 8-ounce cup. It's like a wide, short cup. And then I
Oh,
use
yeah.
these like little 2-ounce
Yeah.
cups as well.
Oh, okay.
Um, I use these in froglet tubs or just in tanks, but I just put some of the calcium clay in the cup and I kind of fill it with water, let all the clay absorb the water, and then I kind of bury it like so just a little bit of the lip sticks up out of the substrate or sponge filter mat or whatever I'm using. And I absolutely have seen frogs soak it up like often. Um,
Yeah,
so I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I know they're seeking it out. You know,
going to
a 44-inch wide tank, and I put one of these cups in there, and the frog is sitting directly on this. It's like there's a reason it's often doing that.
yeah,
Nothing about this is enticing looking or like that's it. I don't put it in like a hidden spot. I'll set it right in the middle, and they go and sit on there. And
yeah.
I don't put like food on there. There's nothing that could be basically telling them that there's a reason to go sit here besides something they're soaking up through that pelvic patch.
I wonder how they
People have
know that
seen,
it's there as well.
yeah.
Or
I
yeah,
wonder that too, or if they're just exploring, or if there's a smell to it or something.
yeah.
I don't know exactly how they know it's there, but I mean, daily I can find some frog in my collection sitting in the clay. Um, I think it seems to be more so females than males. I don't know if it's because the females are using so much. Their vitamins are just depleted from all the trophic eggs they need and all the work that they're doing. But I usually do see females sitting in it, and then also froglets. Because froglets, some of them morph out so tiny, especially with like Pamilio, the Escudo are just unbelievably small. Um, and it takes a while for them to grow, number one. And then number two, it takes a while for them to be able to eat the dusted fruit flies. You know, sometimes it takes 6 weeks. Um, where 6 weeks without calcium, that's when you get issues like metabolic bone disease.
Yeah.
So, if the froglets are able to soak up some calcium through the clay and through their pelvic patch when they're young, maybe that's what keeps them, you know. And that's not to say if you don't use clay, it's not like all your frogs are going to have metabolic bone disease, because I didn't use clay for years and I had many healthy frogs. But um, it's something that I think is the fact that they're constantly soaking it up. There's something going on there. It seems to be benefiting them. It's definitely not hurting them. I kind of do the same thing with UVB, um, but you know, I don't know the actual science behind it or the data behind it, that what's actually going on. But you know, I've heard people talk about the pelvic patch in dart frogs and frogs in general. And I had a buddy, Mike Novi, that was down in Costa Rica, and he's like, "Yeah, I've seen Pamilio and Aratus literally in 98-degree direct sunlight on a clay patch, sitting there soaking up UVB, and also they've got to be
Getting
absorbing something from that clay too." Yep.
yeah, that just brings up so many more questions.
Yeah.
So okay, so do you use it, first of all? Do you use it for um, like your tinctorius and your phyllo base as well, or is it just something you're using with your Oophaga currently?
Just using with the Oophaga right now.
Okay.
I'm sure if I did use it with Tinctorius and some of the other frogs, which is probably a good idea, I probably should. Um, I'm sure it would benefit them as well. I mean, the Tinctorius, they're just, and the Phyllobates too. It's like they're like little bulldogs. They're like heathens. So it's like you could snow cover some Heidi. My Terribilis eat like 5/8 inch crickets. So it's like they're getting tons of calcium. I don't know how much it would actually help them with their bones. Maybe it's got some other thing that could help with maybe egg production or just overall health, maybe. So it's like, I guess it can't hurt to try. And if I notice them sitting there soaking it up, it's like, well, they're using it. They clearly enjoy it. Um, you know, it's like someone giving their frog I don't know, a little water feature, and they like to sit in it, and they're like, yeah, they like the water.
Yeah,
It's like, doesn't do anything, but if they sit in there and they seem to like it, then they like it.
yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
so that's what it would be more for towards me, because I don't really have any issues with metabolic bone disease or like unhealthy offspring and stuff like that with my
For sure.
larger frogs. So, um, you know, I've had tons of SLS and metabolic bone disease with Oophaga in general. I've had some come out missing a limb, some come out just very bizarre deformities. And that's a common thing. Like people deal with it with Oophagas.
Yeah, I've also heard of something like they have seizures when they're low on calcium, something like that. Is
Yeah,
this
yeah,
yeah?
it's yeah. I always keep. I guess with the calcium and vitamins we were talking about. I mean, I have multiple types of calcium I use. My main one is Repashy Calcium Plus. That's my main feeder for calcium.
Mine too.
I have their vitamin A as well, but then I have Renarium's vitamin A. I have Renarium's Carotenoid Plus, which is huge. I think it's an awesome supplement. Um, but yeah, it's important to have a few medications or things that can aid with the Oophaga being super prone to seizures when they're low in calcium. I think amphibian ringer solution is absolutely vital to have. Um, Not just if you notice it in frogs in your collection, if you see one start having a seizure, I mean, it can completely turn them around. But mainly, it's huge for shipping. Oophagas being when they're shipped to you, and if you they just look weak and they look like tons
Skinnier
of
and
stress.
yeah.
Yeah, it's stress is a huge thing for the calcium, the seizures as well. So it's if they're low in calcium and they get spooked or they're stressed, that's usually when like I've had frogs that completely seize up, looks like they're not breathing and they're dead, and someone's like, no, 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 it's not dead. Get a little cup of ringers, put an eighth of an inch in the bottom, set the frog in it, as long as its nose is above, and just give it 20 minutes, put a lid on the cup. I come back and the frog's sitting on the wall, just like ready to go. I'm like,
Wow.
wow.
Okay.
So, I mean, frogs that have seemed like they are dead and you put them in the ringers and they bounce back and they, you know, it's a way for them to, it basically balances all their, the electrolytes and everything in their system where they're not having to use stress and having to use some of the vitamins that they normally would use just to breathe to stay alive.
Yeah.
So it kind of balances their whole system. I also think calcium gluconate is a very important thing to have. It's I get it from Frogs and Things. It's a company here, and he sends a little bottle, and it's got the already measured out powder in it. You just fill it with reverse osmosis water, shake it up, let it dissolve, and then it's great to use for froglets that may not be eating calcium or not absorbing enough calcium through the clay. You just mist the frog and then put one drop of the calcium gluconate on its back, and it's a way for them to get calcium. It's very same thing with the ringers. I would if I saw a frog that seized up, I know it's low in calcium and it's super spooked. So I put it in the cup of ringers, give it 20 minutes, pull it out of the ringers, put it back in the tank, and then I put a drop of calcium gluconate on its back um, to give it the best chance possible. Not to say that every frog makes it from that.
Of course.
Some do perish and it sucks, but I just actually lost my blue histo female yesterday. Found it drowned in a bromeliad.
Okay.
These are
And you don't
things.
know if it was this. I mean, those things happen, of course, but you don't know if it was
Yeah.
like a lack of
I had a
calcium or something.
suspicion. Yeah, no, I don't. I had a suspicion something was up with the tank or with that frog, because it was just being more reclusive. It was normally always out eating, but it wasn't coming out and eating as much. But I did see it eat, and every time I did see it, it looked like a healthy weight, looked good. But I just still, I don't know if I called it my tropical garage senses. I said to
Yeah.
somebody yesterday, I was like, my froggy senses were going off. And I opened the door yesterday to feed, and that all too familiar smell of a rotting frog in water. I was like,
Yeah.
something doesn't smell right in
Something.
here.
Yeah.
So I was searching around everywhere, couldn't find it. And then I just saw really cloudy water, and I knew they weren't rearing any tadpoles. I was like, God dang it. And then, it just looked completely healthy, still had a healthy weight. It's just no lesions or wounds or anything. So I don't know what happened, but it's something that happens with Oophaga adults, something that happens with Oophaga froglets. Sometimes you just find them drowned in bromeliad. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's almost impossible to see why it happened unless you watch that frog go in the water and like drown in there.
Right.
Um, for all I know, it could have got spooked by something, could have got spooked by me and went down in the water and possibly had a seizure and never came out and just drowned in the water.
That's right.
Um, but it's something that happens and you just, it's one of the, large obligate keeping isn't all
Fun and
it's
games.
yeah, there's a lot. It's definitely the most rewarding species when they do successfully produce. And it's just like, because they're kind of the pinnacle of the dart frog hobby. And
Yeah.
so they reproduce and you get healthy, viable offspring. You're just like, man, I feel really good about this. And then when you lose an adult for no reason, you're just like, that's a
What did I do
$1,500
wrong?
to $2,000 frog I just
Yeah,
lost
yeah,
and don't know why. And it looked, it makes you start second guessing
yeah.
everything. Like, did I do something wrong? But then like the other frog in the tank is fine. So you're just like, I don't think so. It's one of those
Just
things.
something that
Sometimes
happens. Yeah,
Oophaga, yep, yep,
yeah.
they can be very sensitive, and that's kind of, I guess, part of the reason of why they're also a lot more expensive. Um, there's just things can happen, and the numbers you get is the other thing. I mean,
It's just harder to breed. Yeah,
there's just low numbers. Yep, yep, low numbers. I guess I don't even tell people. I usually tell people they're not that hard to breed. They're not that hard to get to reproduce. The difficult part is getting
racing the
healthy,
babies.
viable offspring, and
Yeah,
then getting those offspring from day one to day 4 is the most challenging part about keeping large obligates. Or familial, I'd say day 1 to day
even
60.
more. Wow,
Um, they're
wow.
usually fine after 60 days. They're usually fine. I've had histrionica that 3 months in, they're beautiful, healthy frogs. Like, sweet, I think I'm out of the woods. And in 2 weeks, they get skinny and die. And I'm just like, what? They won't eat. They won't take anything. Giving them supplements, giving them calcium gluconate, they just
Nothing.
wither away and they die. And I mean, I treat them for if it's some sort of parasite. I've treated them for nothing. It's just like people tell there's like the 4 month marker. Once they hit 4 months, they seem to be okay.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just so weird how 3 months a frog's super chunky, healthy, doing everything it's supposed to be doing, and then in 2 weeks it just
it just
for no
drops out.
reason. You don't change anything, you don't add anything to the tank, you don't remove the frog from where you just keep it where it was, and it
Same
was doing great,
routine.
and then all yep, just goes to crap. You just don't. There's no rhyme or reason to it, and that's the frustrating part. It's just sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
So happens. Yeah, I keep mountain horn dart frogs. Wow, that nothing I said there made sense. Keep mountain horn dragons, and
Okay.
I haven't bred them yet. They're still a little too young. But like doing the research, everything I keep hearing is you're not out of the woods with the babies until it's been like 6 months, and then you can like
Yep.
start selling them or whatever. Because the first 6 months they could just drop off any minute. So I know exactly what you
Yep.
mean. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
that no, that's okay. So maybe to move away from that, and maybe to move away from
Yeah.
the Oophaga a little bit. You also
Sure.
breed Tinctorius.
Yep.
Um, what are your opinions on raising the tadpoles communally? I know you
So
do it.
yeah.
Do you have success with it? Because I'm getting
Yeah.
tired of
I
many cups.
I did that for years. I
Yeah,
did the single cup for I did single cup from 2006 to 2010. And then I started doing tackle boxes. I was getting little tackle boxes and I had little compartments, but
compartments. Yeah,
basically same idea as single
yeah,
cup, but it did take up less space because I could stack them.
that's smart. Yeah,
Um, and I did that for a while. And then I started doing the communally raised, and there's a couple pros and cons to it. I don't even know if I consider it really a con, but some people might. Some people that do it for a business. You know, the best way I could say it is that the actual morphlets, the frogs coming out of the water, were double the size, double the power, double the strength. I mean, possibly triple. Like they were so much bigger,
then raising them
hardier.
alone.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they could jump like frogs I raised in a cup by themselves. When the day out of the water, they may be able to hop like a couple inches, like 2 inches or so, maybe. Um, Day one, um, it may have took 10 to 10 to 20 days to where they could jump like a substantial amount, and they were eating pretty regularly.
Yeah,
The communally raised ones, day one, they can jump 10, 15 inches. Like they're like fully developed
interesting.
frogs. Even with the tail, they can jump. They're so much stronger and bigger. Um, and they
Why do
also
you think
seem to
that
take,
is?
I don't know if it's a survival of the fittest thing. Um,
Okay.
I don't know if it's the flight or fight response. I don't exactly know what's causing them to be larger. Um, they also morph out. They metamorphose much quicker. It's usually about 50 to 60 days rather than like 90. So they're morphing out quicker. You don't get all of them though. There still is some cannibalism that goes on. You know, once in a while I'll see a dead tadpole that it's half shredded up by the other tadpoles that ate it. Maybe it was just a weak one or something, or it was going to die anyways. So I don't exactly know. If I throw 40 tadpoles in a tub, um, I may get like 32 to 35 to come out.
which
So
is
you may
pretty
have
good
better.
numbers.
Yeah, yeah, and they're all bigger, healthier, stronger,
Yeah,
faster frogs, which I think is better ultimately than raising 40 in single cups and getting all 40 to come out. Um, Now, not to
having
say that
eight
all
weak
40 would.
ones.
Yes, exactly, and you still may lose some of those 40 during their growing up phase, which
Right.
I still may lose some of mine as well. The ones communally, you still may lose, you know, 1 to 5. I'd say out of 40. But so I really enjoy it. It's way less work. I mean, you're spending. I
Hours.
have, I don't know. I have 8 tubs, so I
Mhm.
have 8 tubs of tadpoles. I do them all species specific now, or even low count specific with the tinctorius and the terribilis. But I spend about 1 minute um, feeding them. I use the Rapashi Soylent Green. Comes in a gel. You make a gel out of it, and I do like a spoonful in each tub. So I literally lift the top, put it in, lift the top, put it in. So yeah, I'm about a minute a day
And you're done.
and I don't feed them every day. It's like I check every couple days. And then periodically when you expect it's been about 2 months, start checking around, looking and see if you see them with the front arms. Um, Sometimes I let the tails absorb completely and they'll climb the glass and I'll throw them in the froglet bin. Or sometimes I'll pull them if they have a little tail still. I'll pull them and set them in a morphing cup. I don't really do the morph cup too often anymore.
Which is like where you
But I
tilt
just
the cup.
yeah, yeah. I noticed the tail's either really small or they climb the glass. There's like a little ledge on my tubs I use too. There's like a little ledge where they can climb up and they kind of sit there. Once
Sit
I see
there.
them sitting there, yep, I make them hop in my little fishing net and I throw them in the tub.
Okay.
But it's just so much easier, so much less work, and you get really big, healthy froglets. So the only maintenance you really need to do, which sometimes I don't do it, is it's good to do a water change. I
Right.
would say like a 50% water change on the tub every like 6 weeks is probably good, but I probably haven't done mine in like a year. so,
Okay. Wow.
so
Okay.
it's just, and they're still morphing out. They may not be as big as they were. So I think that the water quality has something to do with their size and their health too. Um,
It's more
but
volume of water now as well
yeah,
than when you're
yeah,
raising them in cups. That's also something. Yeah, it's very interesting.
yep,
And then are you throwing in like so you have a batch that's in there that's already like a month old? Are you throwing
yep.
new tadpoles in there as well?
Yeah, I have tubs. Yeah, it's like I have one Qatari River tub, and there may be 4 tadpoles that have front arms are ready to come out, varying ages from morphing to day one. Um,
Wow.
so
Okay.
yeah, they don't seem to have issues.
That
But
is that. You're right. That would make life a lot easier.
yeah, yeah, it's like I don't. I usually keep where I used to transport tadpoles from the petri dish. Like the second they came out of the egg casing, I would
Yeah.
throw them in a cup. I wait now. Yeah, I fill the petri dish up with water and give them 5 to 10 days. And they get a little bigger and they get like they're swimming really good. Then I throw them
And they
in
throw it there. Are
because
you
if you throw
feeding them
some
in
really
there? Sorry
for
to
the five to
interrupt.
ten days,
Yeah.
usually not. Sometimes I would pour them in a 16-ounce cup and with a little bit of water and I'd feed them.
Okay.
I have some like little sprinkle food I used to for like Ranatomea if I was going to raise, but yeah, I'd feed them for yeah maybe 3 days. Um, the first 3 to 5 days, I just let them sit in the water, and
Okay.
then I'd feed them, and then I'd move them to the tub.
And that probably helps with
Yeah,
the
it's
success.
yeah, I think so. It's a good way to notice too, like if there's something with the clutch that all the frogs were, all the tadpoles were to die, and you
Yeah.
threw them in the tub, whatever all that dead matter and could cause an issue with the fouling the water up, and you could
Yeah.
possibly lose all your tadpoles.
You definitely get a
So I
pneumonia
could,
spike. Yeah.
yep. So it's kind of a way to, I guess, have some biosecurity in your tadpole bins.
That's very
But
interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's great. I recommend anybody to try it,
Yeah.
especially with. I've done it with Tinctorius, I've done it with Leucomelis, and I've done it with the Phyllobates. I've had great success. I did it with Olibates too. I didn't do it in the tub like the ones I have with the sponge filter mat, but I just did because I have some Olibates Zaparo, and they lay like big clutches too. I was getting like 24 eggs in a clutch, and I had 3 of them. So I was like, I'm not raising. There's no way. So I just had my little froglet bins. They're like 12 by 12 by 6 maybe. I
Okay.
filled it halfway full with spring water, and I threw some Java moss in there and threw all the tadpoles in there. No filtration at all, and they all morphed out. So
That's currently how I raise my Vitalis babies. It's just a big
okay,
tub, and
yep.
I just throw them. But I've never tried different age groups. It's like every clutch gets a different tub, and I just have tubs stacking. So it's
Oh
yeah,
no.
yeah. So I'm definitely gonna try to just do it all together.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Um,
It's great.
yeah, and you mentioned at one point through that you had the sprinkle food for when you're raising Granitomea, or when you
Yep.
um,
Yeah.
what is the sprinkle food? Is it like a higher protein food or
It
um,
is from Dart Frog Connection. Um,
okay.
I don't know. He just sent me like a little care package one day. He sent me like one of those 3D printed bromeliads. Had a bunch of tadpole food in there. I'm not exact. I didn't read the ingredients or like check it out. He just said, "Yeah, it works well for me." I was like, "All right, cool." So I
Okay.
tried it with the ransom and it worked well. That's what I fed the Zaparo with too. Because that Soylent Green, if you don't have some sort of filtration in your tub, the Soylent Green can foul up the water and make it stink real bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
have experienced this as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty important. Like I would say, if you're going to feed Soylent Green, and you don't have a sponge filter mat or some sort of filtration on that in the tub, do a water change like the day or 2 after, like
Yeah.
because it'll stink bad.
Yeah. I again, takes a lot more time than for me than it should, but I do water changes on them like almost once a week now.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, so I'm definitely I want to move everything to sponge filters and everything. But when you say sponge filter map, is this Matt? Is it like the length of the bottom or the length of the side?
So yeah, I probably misspoke there. I didn't mean sponge filter mat. I just meant
Just a
some sort of sponge filter.
sponge filter. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I misspoke there. Sorry about that. But
So
yeah, I
that's
just
a
use a
lot
little
of it
4 inch.
filtration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just one little 4 inch sponge filter. And I have, so let's see, I have four tubs with they each have a sponge filter each, and then I have another 4 tubs each with a sponge filter, and then I have two of these big air pumps that are running air to them. But that's all I do is for the filtration. Some of the tubs I use that ADA Amazonia aqua soil.
So okay, and
Um, kept the water really clear.
okay,
I don't know if it was that was
is that
doing it.
because you planted it more, or
I still don't have any plants in
you
there.
just Java moss?
Java moss occasionally, and then I also have like that frog bit or
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Savinia, I think is what it's called. But sometimes that grows too crazy in there, and like
The floating plant.
yeah, it coats it too much, and I'm like, I don't know if the tadpoles can actually come up here and breathe because it's like
Right.
a thick carpet. So I
Right.
try to keep that at bay, because yeah, it grows like crazy in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, the sponge filter mat, that's really all I do for the filtration. And yeah, it's surprising how, I guess, crispy it keeps the water.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's all I use for my aquariums as well. Wrong side.
yep,
Aquariums as well.
yep,
No, that's awesome. Okay. And then another thing I really wanted to ask you about is
yeah,
you've now you've set up tanks with the both like regular substrate like an ABG mix and whatever,
yeah,
and what's now known as the Troy Goldberg method, the sponge filters, or
yeah,
not the sponge filters, but the sponge mats and
yeah,
whatever.
yep.
What are you finding the biggest differences are, and would you recommend more people switch to? I only use ABG mix currently. Would you recommend more people switch to using the sponge mat?
You know, I think it's whatever you're comfortable or whatever you're used to doing. If you're, they both work. You know, I've the majority of my tanks are some sort of false bottom, either grow stones or the leakables or hydroton, whatever, that drainage layer, and then ABG on top. That's the majority of my tanks. But because I just recently started doing the sponge filter the past, I don't know, 2 years or 2.5 years.
Right.
I absolutely love the sponge filter, Matt. I can tell you this: any tanks that I build from now till whenever, until there's something gives me a reason, I'm going to continue using the sponge filter.
Okay.
I think in cost, it's about the same as
Right.
ABG. It's cleaner. If you ever need to gut a tank, you just pull the sponge mat out,
Yeah.
pull it out. It drains obviously very well. It's a filter pad, so water percolates through it extremely well. I do think it's important to use the correct, I guess, porosity, or they call it the PPI, which is the
Mm-hmm.
pers per inch. I like the lower number, like the 10 to 15 PPI. Water percolates through it really easily. Where like the 30 PPI is like almost like it feels to me like similar to even like kind of the sponge here,
Yeah.
or like speaker foam.
Yeah.
It's really fine, and water can kind of pool up on top of it and take a while. Yeah, it takes a while for it to percolate through. So I think it's important to use the correct PPI. But what's awesome about it for me is I mean the weight. It's obviously lighter than
Right.
2 gallons of ABG soaked in water and moisture. It's way lighter. If you want to use a water feature, that water doesn't have to, a waterfall doesn't have to touch ABG and
It's just going
get
through
dirty.
more
Just
filtration, technically.
Yep, more filtration. It'll be cleaner. Um, and what I really like about it in terms of scaping a tank is, when you scape a tank with ABG or the ground area and you make hills, like those hills eventually deteriorate over time, and you have to
Right.
put more ABG back in. Oftentimes they just kind of don't sit after they get moisture and everything, and all the isopods and springtails break everything down. It just kind of gets back down to a flat level,
Yeah.
unless you have like an extreme hill you make. With this, you can carve it extremely easy to whatever landscape, shape, form you ever want to have, and it's never going to lose that shape. So
Right.
it's very easy to do too. Just stacking it up, and then you're literally shaving it with those little snap blades I use. Um, it's just extremely easy to do, and you can create an interesting scape on the ground as well,
Yeah.
not just the background. Most
Right.
vivarium, it's an interesting background. Everyone considers the hardscape all the background, and then the ground's just a flat piece of dirt. Is how it is. But if you go in the jungle, it's not just a flat piece of dirt.
There's
There's all kinds
elevation.
of
Yeah.
there's root structures, all kinds of stuff. So
Right.
you can actually create. I mean, if I wanted to, I could create tons of root structures with the foam and just kind of carve it around and do whatever I want on the ground area.
And then keep going into
And
the background too.
yep, yep,
Yeah.
it's just an extremely awesome product. And I use it for also some of my old tanks that I used to do backgrounds on. I wouldn't Now what I do is after I carve the foam down, I put silicone, I make like a silicone edge, and I right where the foam meets the glass, and I silicone all that, because if the foam wants to pull away, silicone sticks extremely well to glass. It bonds with glass, so it's not going to pull away.
Right.
So before, areas of my background would pull off the glass and create a gap. Frogs could get back there, anything could get back there. So I use the sponge mat as plugs. So if I have any area that starts coming away,
Just kind of,
I just
yeah.
take that sponge and just shove it in there, and it fills that void. Or if I pull a big bromeliad out and it's got all kinds of root structures and pulls a bunch of foam, I can use that to kind of fill it. And it's black, so it doesn't like show like yellow and white or whatever color
Right.
foam you use. So, and then I can cover that with moss or plants or whatever. So I use it for a lot more than just the sponge mat that, for the substrate area. But yeah, I mean, it's so easy to do too. I mean, when you do a drainage layer and then a substrate layer, where this is acting as both, it's acting as your drainage and your substrate. You literally just cut it to shape, set it in the tank, and you can be done. If you
Can be
don't feel
done.
like yeah, you can be done with it. And I just top it. I've done some where I just topped with a very thin layer of sphagnum moss. Um, I've done some where I've done no sphagnum moss, no live moss, just literally leaf litter on top of it. And eventually, the early leaves, they kind of turn into their own, turns
Substrate
into
kind
a
of,
substrate.
yeah,
Basically, it
yeah,
breaks down, and
yeah.
the fresh leaves on top. So that's actually probably the most naturalistic to how it is in the jungle. I mean, you've got wet leaves on the bottom that are kind of the substrate. There's like hardly any nutrients in the substrate in the jungle, and um, and then you have the fresh leaves on top. So I have ones like that, and then I have the ones that everyone seems to like the most, are the ones where I use the low growing tropical moss right on top, and then I do leaf litter in certain areas there. But that seems to be the style that most people, I get asked about the most. People really like the moss, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I
they want
mean,
to know what moss I use, and I'm just not allowed to say.
you're not allowed to say.
my
Okay.
my source that I've asked him, and he just said, please do not, like, do not leak. I don't want anyone hitting me up for moss. I was like, all right.
Don't leak the source, or don't leak the type of moss.
The source,
Oh, okay.
the only type of moss, it's definitely, it's a tropical moss. He calls it low growing tropical moss,
Okay. Interesting.
and
Okay.
so I use that, and then he also has some Ricardia species of liverwort, which is
That's what
that's
I
it's
use.
that's
Incredible.
awesome. That's the
Incredible.
best. It's
Yeah.
it's the coolest looking for sure.
Yeah. It's once it gets going on a piece of cork
Yep.
bark or something, it's
Yep.
incredible. Yeah.
That doesn't do well on the ground for me though. It only does well on cork bark, or I don't use cork, but like wood or any like background. Sometimes it can take well in a background, but it seems like it's got to be sort of on the higher
On
side of the tank.
Yeah, I don't know if it's interesting. I also find sometimes it does better in the shade, and sometimes it does better like right under the light, and then
Okay.
it's a very weird one for sure.
Yeah.
But for the floor, I've had semi success growing it um on leaf litter.
Okay.
Like right, like I physically put the pieces on the leaf litter and then sprayed them down every day until like I kind of got something going. But it was too
Finally get
much. It was
started.
too much work. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't
Yeah.
look great
That's
now.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's what the low growing tropical moss is great for, is ground cover.
yeah,
It's green. It doesn't get leggy. It stays short. Grows fairly quick, and yeah, it does extremely well on the ground. So that's primarily what I use for the ground areas. But
that's awesome.
yeah.
So I have a few more questions on that, if that on the sponge, if
Sure.
that's okay. So
Yeah.
you did already kind of cover one of them when you said the forest ground has no nutrients, because I was gonna ask, like compared to an ABG mix for the plants, there's
Yeah.
not much nutrients in there, but
Yeah.
also is that why you use more epiphytes and low growing mosses to kind of combat
Yeah.
that, or
Yeah. I
um,
mean, a lot of people ask me about that. Like, do you notice a difference from the
yeah,
substrate and the sponge mat with your plants? And the short answer is no. I don't notice a difference at all. Being that most of the stuff, pretty much everything I use, philodendrons, peperomia, they're all epiphytes. Like, they don't
right,
need soil. They'll grow on wood. They'll grow on moss. They'll grow on rocks.
yeah,
Um, it's rocks. That wouldn't be a good place to start the plant out.
yeah,
It probably would dry up and not do well. That's another tip actually I don't talk about much, but um, when I set up an enclosure and I do the background, and I've dried it and rinsed it many times. A lot of people ask about the dry lock. They have like issues with the plants dying. Um, they think it's like a chemical from the dry lock. That I don't exactly know the reason, but what I do after I set up a tank, if I'm not in a hurry, like if I'm not setting up a tank that needs to be done yesterday, and it's
yeah,
like if I'm not doing that and I'm just making a new tank and I'm planned it out accordingly, I'll set the tank up and I'll put it on the misting system with no plants, no substrate, just the tank in there itself. Sometimes if I'm doing the sponge filter mat. So if I'm not doing substrate, and I'll have it run on the Mist King and on the same timing that my tanks do, um, for a good week to 2 weeks. What that does is it rinses the background even further, and it also lets the wood and whatever in the tank kind of get saturated,
yeah,
because that dry lock, I believe it does absorb some water, and so I think what happens when people are having plants die quickly after they set up a tank and they do the dry lock background, I think what's happening is they set up the tank, they rinse it a few times, like, all right, I'm done. They put it on the rack, and then right from day one, they plant it.
they throw the plants
And
in there.
then it's absorbing a lot of that water. And I think the plants are just drying out, is what's going on there. So like with my 300 gallon that I did, I had that set up on the misting system for like 2.5, 3 weeks
Right.
before I even put a plant in it. And it had the water running in the bottom, it had the waterfalls running. So um, I didn't lose a single plant from being in contact with dry log when I planted it. So I think that's part of it. And I think it's huge for any, especially people like that want to grow moss. There was like every
Yeah.
time I put moss in a tank, it dries up. It's like, well, did you set it up like that day? You set up the background? Because if that wood is wet and it's absorbed, then when you
Moss
spray a
has all the
tank
water
that
need.
exactly. So that's I think very important. But getting back to the question, sorry about that tangent again. But getting back to the question, I've had some plant people, like when I send them a picture and they're like, oh, I see that it's got some chlorosis on that plant, it's starting to yellow there on the leaf. And I'm like, well, yeah, that happens with ABG too. Like plants
Yeah.
don't, like leaves don't live forever. A leaf lives for a few months, sometimes a year. And then that leaf starts to die out as a new one comes up. It's like someone looking at a bromeliad and being like, well, there's got a bunch of dead leaves on the bottom there. It's like, that's
That's
if
what
you
it
go to the
does.
jungle, that's what you're going to see in the jungle. There's a
Yeah.
ton of dead leaves on the bottom and new leaves come out. Like that's how they grow. So I I've had my 300 gallon has no substrate. I've got Anthurium warocquianum. I've got or warocquianum, whatever you want to call it. I've got Vecchia. I've got some of the like harder to grow, I guess, house plants. Um, I think everything grows extremely well in vivariums. We kind of have like cheat codes basically for plants that these people struggle with to
Yes.
keep alive outside of tanks. So,
Yes.
but everything, I mean, it's grown extremely well. New huge leaves. Nothing looks like poorly grown, I guess, or poorly growing conditions. Like
Right.
everything grows extremely well under them. Um, and I think part of that reason is I don't really have too many plants growing in that sponge filter mat. I do like I'll do like a little tiny if I have a say it's a huge plant and there's just a little tiny root ball in the end, I wrap it in a little bit of sphagnum moss and um I pin it to the background. So the only
Right.
thing it takes a while for those roots to make their way down and start. But I mean, I have there's a tank over here that it's all sponge filter, no substrate, leaf litter on top. Um, and there's burl marks, a philodendron burl marks, and there's like the whole front of the tank. You just see crazy roots running throughout the
It
sponge filter
does.
mat now. So it penetrates and so it's doing its thing. I mean, like, yeah, I don't notice a difference. But I'm not a plant specialist. Like I don't know.
Right.
I'm not a botanist. I don't know like it's like I see something that like starts to yellow and it dies. I'm like, yeah, it's got a new leaf coming up. It'll be fine. New leaf comes up and it's beautiful. Like I don't worry about that stuff. Where I'm sure some people do, and some people may give their tanks tons of nutrients and growing aids and stuff and fertilizers where they get like this one's got a better color. It's like I don't know,
Yeah.
dude. Mine grows and it's green.
Get
That's
that more
that's all I'm
pink
happy.
on the leaves and then
Yeah,
yeah.
like that's something I don't go for. I try and I stay away from color pretty much, unless it's like that. Um, it's like kind of a darker, almost like purplish color. Sometimes I have like the Solanum Solanum ulanum.
Yes.
That's kind of got that same color, and I like that in a
Right.
vivarium, but it's darker. I don't like bright reds and pinks and oranges. Like I try and yellows. I'm stay away from that.
Yeah, I'm not much of a plant person myself. If whatever my philosophy is more, it's alive, it's working. I don't. Yeah, I
Yep,
agree with you 100%. Um,
exactly.
but then what about microfauna? Do springtails breed well in the sponge and like
Yeah,
isopods as well and all of that?
yeah.
You
So
don't find any problems.
don't find any problems. I don't really seed my tanks anymore. I used to seed them back in the day. I'd dump a whole culture of white springtails and dwarf white isopods and dwarf
Yeah.
purple isopods. I'd dump them in the tank. I don't do it anymore because a lot of the time I'm transplanting
Right.
plants from, and they just like all my tanks have microfauna. There's also these little blue springtails or they call them chrome. They're like the real shiny little. I shine a light in there, like they're in the tank. There's
Okay.
isopods I didn't put in there. Like there's all kinds of stuff in there that I didn't put there. It just
It
comes
just
with leaf. I don't know if it's coming on the leaf litter, coming on plants, coming on the moss that I get. I don't know, but yeah. I do notice that not having the substrate or ABG, it seems like the population of the microfauna is staying in that leaf litter layer, which is great
which is
for froglets and little frogs that need those. Um, they're not buried under the substrate. Um, and it the substrate or the sponge filter mat, being it's so porous, it's kind of like, I mean, it's just there's tons of surface area for them to breed and congregate and do whatever on. If they want to drop down to the water level, it's great. The worst thing about the false bottoms with like the egg crate is that when springtails fall under, they sit there and they just float. Unless you flood the tank,
they're
they're
not
not
gonna
getting
get
back
back.
up. So it's just like it. So that's why I stopped using that years ago, and I started using like grow stones, which is similar to the leca or like or lava rock. So that's why I started using that. But then when I started using this, I'm like, it's the same thing, and it's even lighter. It's cheaper, and I don't need substrate. I can just so it's like that's why there's so many pros for it for me.
Yeah.
I can't really find the cons.
So you don't
I
even put
really
anything under it. It's just all the way to the bottom. It's just sponge. How I don't know if this
Yep.
makes a difference, but how many inches do you use?
I'm not a size guy. No, if it's so most of my tanks have like a 4-inch substrate or a 4-inch substrate dam.
Okay.
Some of them have a 6-inch, but I uh I probably do in the front, the very most like the fronter edge, like what you can see. I try to keep that at like 2 inches. As
Okay.
long as
Kind of
the two
slopes
inches
up.
is above my drainage hole, and then I kind of slope it up towards the back just
Okay.
because that creates more depth. Um, but but yeah, it's whatever you want it to be. In the 300 gallon, I did do the false bottom, like a riser,
Yeah.
because there's 8 inches of water in the bottom, and I didn't want, if that was all sponge filter mat, I felt that it's creating a lot of possible potential dead spots that could, harbor
Get bacteria
cyanobacteria.
or whatever.
So I
Yeah.
have had cyanobacteria issues with tanks, but I feel like with vivariums, I've had cyanobacteria issues with any water feature, not just the sponge filter mat.
Right.
Any feature I've ever done in a vivarium has had some sort of cyanobacteria.
Right.
Yep. I've never
That
had it not show up. So that's a problem. People like have asked, like, do you have cyanobacteria issues with it? It's like, yeah, I have, but I have it with I've never had
everything.
a vivarium. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's everything I do in a vivarium. It seems to get that cyanobacteria. So
Do you have a method
I
of
don't know.
basting it?
I did try the chemiclean. I did the chemiclean a couple times. Seemed to work. In the 300 gallon, I had a little bit of it in this one section, like farthest from the outflow,
Yeah.
from the sump. And so I did add a power head to see if like the flow, adding more flow would help, which it did, but I still had a little bit. What I did is I changed my light cycle to exactly 12 hours.
Made it shorter. Yeah.
My vivariums, like my breeder tanks, sometimes I don't get to come out here um, till like 8, 9 o'clock at night.
So you leave
So
them on.
yeah, so I was running 10 a.m. to 1, 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. was my light cycle out here. But now I think I have these ones are set. That's still, yeah, these ones are still 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. But the big 300 gallon is 11. It's 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Okay.
And doing that seemed to help significantly. Like I have very, very little cyanobacteria, where it's just like literally like a 1 or 2 square inches on the bottom on
Okay.
the, and I have no fish in there or anything. So I don't really have the back. I mean, I have the sump and everything running, but I don't have, the bio load from the fishes or anything like that. But I'm going to be adding fish soon.
Okay.
Um, and so we'll see how that goes. But
Okay.
yeah, the tanks, the vivariums that I had cyanobacteria, and I mean, it would be like the entire water section was covered in it, like the entire water section. So um, I think a big part of that is that light cycle, though. Really shallow water, really bright lights, running for 15 hours a day. I don't. I think it's kind of impossible to not get it under those conditions.
Okay.
Yep.
First of all, I'm really glad to hear you say that because I also come in here really late at night and keep my lights on longer than they should be. So
Yep.
Just a quick reroute. Do you think that affects the frogs and their breeding habits? You
No,
haven't
I
found
think
anything.
they no, I think they adapt just like anything else. If someone has a light cycle, they turn their lights on at 6 a.m. and they're out at 6 p.m., the frogs will understand.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and like some people are really strict about like feeding times. Like they feed their frogs every, Mondays, Wednesdays,
Hmm.
Fridays, sometimes Sunday. And it's like I feed at 3 p.m. It's like that's fine. I mean, everything I do is at random. The only thing that's like on a set schedule are my lights and my misting.
Yeah.
Everything else, I just completely do at random.
Random.
Sometimes I feed my adults 6 days in a row. Um, in the jungle, they eat every day.
Yeah.
They eat all day every day.
Yeah.
Um, so
Constantly eating.
you know, I don't think it's a good idea to give your your frogs flies all day every day. But um, if I feed a tank Monday, if I feed some Tinctorius Monday, and I go back Tuesday and I open the door and there's some flies moving around, I'm not going to feed them.
Yeah.
But if I open the door and there's not a fly in sight, it's like, yeah, I'll give you guys some food. I give them, 100 flies. I also think it's kind of important to not for if you're trying to keep like a good healthy weight, like kind of bulky frogs. If you feed frequently but less amounts. So if you feed
Yes.
once a day and you feed 400 flies, they could possibly get stressed out by the amount of flies. They're most likely not going to eat all 400 at once. So if you feed 100 at 4 different times in that day, they'll probably eat all 400 of those
All
flies,
400.
and you will notice their weight significantly change. So like I tell people that when they have skinny frogs, like, is my frog looking too skinny? I'm like, try feeding 10 flies 10 times a day. If you can do that, you have 12 hours to kill and you want to come back every hour and,
Yeah.
just check, you can do that. And if they're eating those small amounts, you'll notice their weight will increase significantly.
And the other benefit of feeding it small amounts is the supplements don't just wear out. Like if you're feeding 400 frogs, by the time they get to the 400th frog, that's a completely
It's,
like there's no
it's,
supplements
yeah,
on that fruit fly. Like
it's
yeah,
exactly,
so
exactly.
I
Yep.
absolutely agree with that. I feed my frogs daily actually, but
Yep.
like very very little amounts of fruit flies. Like
Yep.
enough for that. Like when I come the next day, as you said, there's nothing in the tank and they can get more food. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, no, that's
Yep.
that's awesome. Very very interesting. Um, like little tidbit, I guess. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
awesome. So I've already had you for a very long time. I don't know. I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want
Ah,
to ask you a couple
okay.
of questions about the 300 gallon, if that's okay with
Yeah.
you. Uh,
Absolutely.
sweet. So first of all, the Antilopus are an incredible species. I've been you got yours from Nick Stacy, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I've been
Yep.
watching. I was watching the whole breeding process and him trying to get them spawn, and it
It's crazy.
incredible. Are you
Yeah.
going to attempt to do the same thing?
No.
No,
No.
it
So
did seem like a lot of work. Yeah.
yeah, I got them because the 300 is a display tank. So I just wanted a display animal that would do well in a paludarium setting. So dart frogs, it's not the best setup for them.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I did have some bastimentos in there at one point, but I
Okay.
pulled them because they escaped. um,
Okay.
that was one thing I learned with a 4 foot tall tank. When you slide that door open, there's that much more room for them to jump out.
Yeah.
So that was an issue. So I took those out
They took
after I
themselves
found,
out.
yeah, two of them got out, and I was like, all right, that's enough. I'm moving the
Yeah.
other ones. So um, yeah, I got the Adelopus because they're bold. They walk. They have the cool little call,
Yeah.
and then they do the little hand waving that they do because they like to hang around noisy streams and waterfalls. So normally, then their call isn't very loud. It's like a real faint whistle, um, and that's why they wave because most females or other males wouldn't hear that, so they do the wave to show like the,
Have you
the
seen it
visual
yet?
call. I have
Yeah.
seen the
Okay.
it's super cool to see. Um, I'm a little surprised by them because mine are predominantly arboreal. They stay up in the big leaves a lot. They're not down on the ground too often. I see a couple females down there once in a while feeding, but most of the time they're all up in the leaves. Pretty much where the glass frogs spend their time. But
Okay.
It's just the different time
The
switch. The glass frogs
time,
are up
the
at
dim.
night, and
Yeah.
yeah, these guys are up during the day. I have 10 Atelopus Palios. I have I think it's a 6.4. And then I have the 5 Valerii, which I've had breeding. They bred, and I had a viable clutch from them, which is cool.
In the 300
Um,
gallon.
mhm.
Did
Yeah,
you
the
just
glass
find
frogs.
the tadpoles in the water section?
No, I found the eggs.
They found it. Okay.
So, yeah, I didn't pull the eggs, and I think the tadpoles that got in the water area. There's a couple little gaps from my riser, and I think they got behind, so I couldn't really monitor them. But
Okay.
they may still be in there, maybe alive. Glass frogs
Yeah.
take forever because Nick Stacy sent me. He sent me a clutch of glass frogs, and he sent me that back in like April. I just had my first 2 come out of the water like 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So it takes a long time, and I raised them in a tub, not with a sponge filter. I did a canister filter on them.
Okay.
But yeah, they take a long time. So the tadpoles could still be alive in there, eating whatever algae and diatoms are in the tank. But I really I really wouldn't know. They're so small when they morph out, or when they break out of the egg. But yeah, the Atelopus are a really cool species. Um, and what's great about them for a paludarium setting is that, especially with glass frogs too, is that they both eat the same. Like they both can eat high DI fruit flies, and
Right.
for
Yeah.
their entire life, it's all they need. So originally, I was going to do red-eyed tree frogs in the tank, and then like Pamilio blue jeans, because they share habitat in the wild. So I figured I could do it here. But the issue I ran into was crickets,
Right.
because red eyes will take some big crickets, and then if you know the blue jeans, if they're sleeping at night, their crickets have a tendency, or potential to chew on them, which nobody wants that. So
Yeah, for
that
sure.
was something I didn't feel like battling. I knew I could have did it if I would have did like a floating feeder,
Hmm.
um, where the red eyes would just basically eat. That's the only place they'd eat the crickets. But
Like
to
in the
me,
water.
yes, yeah. So
Okay.
the crickets
Yes.
really couldn't get out, and they couldn't climb the background or do whatever. That's pretty much the only way I could have did it. And to me, nothing about that seems just
Then you're
natural.
battling. Yeah,
Kind of,
you're battling crickets
yeah,
in the water as well, like dead crickets in the. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just like, maybe I should look for a different species. And then I was just going to do only Cruzio Hylocrispidopus. Going to do a big group of them. And then I decided that tree frogs in a display tank are kind of the worst kind of, they're the worst candidate because you're only going to see them at night. So
Yeah.
I still want to do a tank for Craspies at some point. But it won't be a big giant display. It'll just be a cool little display.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do it for my son's room or something.
Something
But
easier to clean too, because they go all over the glass.
all over.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were the issues I ran into. And then I was talking to Nick one day and just like, do you think the Balios would do good in here? He's like, that's absolutely a perfect setup for them. I was like, sweet,
Sweet.
done, let's do it.
Send me some. Yeah.
So yep. So we worked that deal out, and yeah, I asked him, he's like, are you planning on breeding him? I was like, no, just for display purposes. He's like, well, I mean, they have gone in plexus multiple times.
Since
I
you've had
found
them.
yes, yeah,
Wow. Okay.
I found multiple males, multiple females in plexus. Never found eggs, although I also haven't really looked super well for eggs. Nick said that I think the Arlington Zoo, I think they breed them, or somewhere in Texas. Maybe it's Fort Wayne. I can't remember, but somewhere in some zoo, some establishment, they breed their Atelopus in big groups in a big tank in a big paludarium. He's like, your setup, the fact that you have the sump, you have really good water quality, you
Right.
absolutely they could survive in there. So that's pretty much where I'm going with it. If they breed and they lay eggs in here, I'll hope for the best. But I'm
Yeah.
not.
Just.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not something that's not like a goal of mine. Um, I guess the goal was to have something breed in there, and the glass frogs already did, so that was
There you
cool.
go. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now the group of tadpoles the group of glass frog tadpoles that Nick sent you, are they also going into the 300?
Yeah, I already put
Poaching.
the two that morphed out. I already put them in. There's
Okay.
still like 5 or 6 more. So yeah, if they make it, yeah, I'll throw them in too. So yeah, that was
Awesome.
the. I put a picture up on Instagram a couple weeks ago of a little one on the glass, and you can see its tail. It was a. It looked like it was like glowing green. It's pretty cool.
I think I did see that one. Yes, I think I
Yeah,
did see that
yeah.
picture.
That's
Yeah,
one of Nick's babies that got added, and I saw them. So yeah, it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago when I took that picture. It was right around New Year's, I remember. And then I just saw one last week in there. It absorbed the tail. It's eating. So
sweet.
yeah,
Awesome. Are
which
they the
that's
same species of the tree frog as the ones you
yeah,
have before? Yeah,
they're both Valorai. Yep,
perfect. Okay, that's awesome.
or Valoria, however you want to say it.
Awesome. And then is there any? I know you already said fish. First of all, do you have and do you know what kind of fish you're planning to put in there?
Yeah, so I'm doing a trade with a really big famous YouTuber,
Okay.
um, with in the I guess vivarium hobby world. He's massive, and he lives an hour from me. So we are trading some frogs for some fish, and he gave me like a group of fish to choose from. And I don't know anything about fish. Like I've never kept fish. I know nothing. But I just literally like he was like, these fish will all do well with these groups. So I chose celestial pearl danios.
I think I know who this is.
Um,
Okay. Go ahead.
and then I chose I forget which Cory cat. But there's some Cory cats and then some Amano shrimp. So he said they'll do absolutely well. And so he went and got fish for me, and he is acclimating them. And yeah, he's gonna. I don't know. Whenever he drives over here, he's gonna drop the fish off. And he said he wants to pick my brain about vivariums and planting, and then he's gonna do his tank, and then I'm gonna take the frogs to him and see his setup. So
Sweet.
that should be pretty cool.
I'm not gonna guess on air, but
Oh,
I'm
wait, hold on
I'm
one second.
gonna guess afterwards.
Something happened. My Siri popped up, and I couldn't hear what you said. What was that last part you said?
Oh, sorry. I said I'm not gonna try to guess on air, but I might try to throw a few
Oh,
guesses at you afterwards because I'm very curious. And also, there's somebody
sure.
that in that space that I'm just gonna say I've been waiting for that person to get dart frogs for a very long time. So my fingers are crossed that.
You're probably right. You're probably right. I think
Okay.
everyone's been waiting for him to get them.
Sweet, sweet.
Yep. Yep.
That's awesome. I hope you guys get to film the.
Yeah.
I'm sure you will, but I hope you get to film
Yep.
the actual like
I know he
going to each
will.
other's rooms and stuff. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing all that. Then that would be awesome. Do you
Yeah.
is
Absolutely.
are you picking the frogs or is he picking the frogs?
He picked the frogs.
He picked the frogs. Okay, okay, awesome.
He picked the frogs. Yep. And I just happen to have some really a really nice line of the frogs he wants. So, um,
Okay.
they're classic.
Yes.
Classic
Okay.
as your
Yeah. Yeah.
ass.
Yeah. I
So,
got. Yeah.
yep.
I know you're working with specific different dot
Yeah.
sizes or whatnot. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yep. Yep.
Very
Yeah. It's
cool.
cool.
Okay. Well, and on that good note, because that's I'm very excited now that we know there's some cool stuff in the works.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. First of all, thank you very very much for all that incredible information. I know I'm gonna have to
Absolutely.
listen to it again when I'm editing, but I'm probably gonna have to hear it once it out a couple of times again because there was actually a lot of good info about well everything, but specifically Oophaga. I've been trying to learn a lot about them for a long time.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you very much.
Absolutely,
Um,
man. Yeah. Anytime you have any questions that if I didn't answer them in the Ufaga, just feel free to reach out to me, man. Like that's, whenever people come over to my house, they come to the garage and they're like, thanks so much for like taking the time out. I'm like, you kidding me, man? Like this is an excuse for me to come out here and I can't get yelled at. So
so
it's like
yeah,
this, I want to be out here. I want to be spending time in here.
you want to be
So
talking
like
about
talking
frogs.
frogs. Yeah. I'll talk frogs literally all day. So,
That's awesome.
yeah, absolutely. Pleasure.
Yeah.
Absolute
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah. And then can you let everybody know where they can find you? I'm sure most people already do, but just in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah. YouTube, Troy's Tropical Garage or Troy Goldberg's Tropical Garage. I was just featured in one of Adam's videos, which was like a huge surprise to
I
me. I was
saw that, and
watching
you
it yesterday.
were the first or the second name to go up, right? I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did see that.
I
Yeah.
was so not expecting it. I was like,
Yeah.
what? Sweet.
There you go. Yeah.
So and then on Instagram, Oophaga Histrionica. That's it. Facebook, Troy Goldberg, hit me up. So yeah,
Yes.
those are my connects.
And I'll have all those links as always in the show below. Um, my info, Daffy's Reptiles on all social medias as well. Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.